again to discuss things.
Brightest day and blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power, Green Lantern's land. Ring capacity 46.1, ring capacity 58.9, ring capacity 64.5, and now I'm charged and burning bright. Ring capacity 70.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentleman Character Discussions. I am Sid Part 2. Joining me today is...
A geek for fun.
And are you afraid?
I'm spooked out.
Yeah, because today we're talking about Parallax, the most fearful villain in all of DC continuity. Except
He's
when
gonna
not.
scroll two directions at once.
That was funny. I wish I was capable of a joke of that high of quality. Yeah, so Parallax is, I don't know, he's one of those interesting cases of this villain that's kind of got this shaky history where he was one thing and then through a retcon he becomes something else. And I guess Jeff Johns does that a lot. Cough, Superboy Prime cough.
We love him for it.
Yeah. So I don't know, Parallax is just interesting because he's initially just Hal Jordan becomes evil and decides to name himself Parallax. And then Johns decides to retcon all of it and make Parallax a, fear demon. And that's much more interesting. But also it's just weird because I don't know, have you ever read Zero Hour?
No.
Okay, and I don't recommend it. It's not very good. But, honestly, the plot of Zero Hour was so shaky and weird to me. So, Hal Jordan goes crazy, kills the Green Lanterns, takes control of the power battery, and becomes the most powerful being in the universe where he can will anything into existence if he tries hard enough. But, in a bad way. And names himself Parallax and kind of dresses like a pimp, minus the hat. And then what he wants to do is he wants to rewrite all of existence to be perfect. And so that, as a villain plot is kind of boring, kind of silly. But one of the things I always really liked about the retcon to making Parallax this, the entity of fear, is that it sounds exactly like someone who's really, really afraid of change and the way things are changing for the worse or for the better would do. That sounds like a very actively afraid thing to do.
Yeah, that whole idea and nebulous idea, because Green Lantern things have this problem that I sometimes run into, and I think it's just something that needs to be addressed, because the moment you take concepts like will, hope, and fear and you make them into a nebulous power source, they're already so hard to truly define as what they actually are. But then you have to legitimately say that people have more of this than others, and once you make it into a thing that can be manipulated, it's already hard to deal with. So creating an entity that is just fear, that's different to every single person you could talk to, and all these different fears and everything are, but there is just a basic concept at the core of that I do feel like, at least when you're applying it to Hal Jordan full Parallax, it does definitely scream of someone going through a crisis, as someone who's just completely afraid of everything and is just having the worst possible reaction to that.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of the denial side of grief that Hal's going through, and again, I think denial is something that's very much wrapped in fear of acceptance, So I think that was kind of the part of the retcon that actually stood out as the best to me, is Hal Jordan got possessed by an entity that made him evil, and it's not just generic evil entity. It's the entity of fear, and that dovetails really nicely into, you know, what the original Parallax 0 Hour plotline was. So that side of the character I think is interesting, but then we get into what Parallax has actually become in mainline continuity with Green Lantern Rebirth, written by Jeff Johns and drawn by an awful person. Ruben did a review of Green Lantern Rebirth and he opened it up that way and I laughed my ass off.
That's the way it needs to be credited from now on.
Yeah. And in that, Parallax is like, you know, Parallax is coming, the fear entity is coming, and it's been like this long game or whatever. And in that, I really like the way that Parallax begins to be written, where he's got this like Darth Sidious vibe to him, where he just says your worst fears to you, and you know he's right, and it's just creepy, and he's got this giant monster bug-looking thing going for him, and just everything about Green Lantern Rebirth and how Parallax is introduced on that wavelength, where like Batman uses fear, and so when Parallax arrives, Batman's judgment is completely compromised. Is a really, really cool idea to kind of, you know, underwrite Batman and thus the rest of like the doubts about Hal Jordan coming back. It's like, no, they're just afraid because they don't know how to stand up to fear properly. I thought that was always a really cool idea.
No, that's a good way to justify as well. Hal Jordan being a specific counterpart to that. I'm going to apologize to anyone listening to this, but this one probably was going to take a bit of a different structure to how we normally do this, because my experience with the character is literally one issue that Ian told me to read. So like this is me basically just, and I don't mind taking this approach because I think it's really interesting, getting your thoughts on this as someone who has like completely no idea. I just kind of want to ask you different aspects of Parallax and how you feel on them, and if there's any way you would take it. So my first place to get this is, the other Green Lantern entities don't really have personalities, do they? Because you mentioned like he's like Darth Sidious, and from what I read, he came across like that, whereas a lot of the other ones were more just like how you'd imagine like a force to be. Why do you think that the Fear one seems to have so much more of like a personality?
That kind of ties into the wider implications of the emotional spectrum, as it's called. And you read Green Lantern Brightest Day, so like it's not that Parallax is the only one with a personality. It's that the warm spectrum has all the personality. The Predator has a personality. Odifan has a personality. The Butcher has a personality, right?
Yeah.
And that's because the further you get away from the center of the spectrum, which is green, the more that the emotion tends to control you, which I think is very true of the emotions that those entities represent. Because like, you get very willful, but that's still very much you. Like when you're being really stubborn about something, that's still you. When you're angry, I don't think it's unfair to say that you kind of become a different person sometimes when you're angry. And like, it's not that you're not responsible for your actions at that point, but they're definitely like, when someone says, oh, don't pay attention to that, he was just upset, we kind of let that slide because I think we've all been there, you know? And so fear is actually close to the center of the spectrum. So it's still got the most you to it, but it's where you start to get into that irrational mode of being, if that makes sense. So like...
No, that...
So like, you know...
No, I meant no, yes, good.
Yeah. So, no, I want you to strong disagree with this. So like, And I think that's again a very relatable thing. Just when you really think about that emotion, when you're afraid of something, you tend to act irrationally, but it's still very much you. Like I remember, I went through a breakup in high school with a girl, and she pulled the "oh, let's remain friends" thing, but then she kept like ignoring my calls to go hang out with her new boyfriend. And I was a fucking moody ass teenager, so that shit was really pissing me off. And I was afraid of, I'd fucked up the relationship, but I was afraid of like, oh no, I figured if we remained friends, I could get it back. And she obviously wasn't interested in that. So I was afraid of losing her, and the thing I did, which was shitty and a dick fucking move, and if you do this, don't. I knew I was going to get her voicemail when I called her, and so I called her and I played the song "She Fucking Hates Me" for her voicemail, and it was an action completely done out of fear, but it was also really creepy and really irresponsible and a really big fucking dick move. But like in retrospect, I can look back at it, it was irrational. The day, like minutes after I hung up and did it, it was completely irrational, and I felt like an idiot for doing it. But I still did, because it's got a very root thing to it, and I think that's kind of why Parallax probably has, he's also got the most development, but I think that's why Parallax has the most characters, because it's the one you connect to the most, and you feel the least separated from yourself in. If that makes sense. I think we've all been... Go ahead.
It's one of those things where, like, fear is such a thing that's, like, something that'll get you angry can be more nebulous concepts. Like, I think if most people see, like, a dog get hurt, it's gonna piss them off. Like, or if someone's, like, in a situation where someone just says something that's just like generally accepted to just be a fucking horrible way to say it. Some people will be like, you can feel that anger. A lot of that can be a lot more general, I feel like. Whereas fear is 100% deeply personal. Everyone's got different fears. You can have like jump scares, which can like frighten most people in the same way, but it's not real fear. That's just like a reaction to a loud noise. Real fear is like when you get creeped out by something that's normally very introspective to what's going on with you, which I feel like is why it's such a trope in fiction for like fear to be used by villains. It's the easiest way to get at a protagonist and reveal what they're about when they're scared. Is reveals like you at your weakest, when you have no determination to break through something, when you're most vulnerable is when you're scared, because that's when fight or flight mechanisms kick in. There's no will to fight, there's just will to run and flee and hide, and that's a very primal like instinct. That's it's not necessarily a bad thing either, because that keeps you alive.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that keeps races going, and I guess that maybe links into Parallax, because doesn't he have a thing about like the Sinestro Corps tries to turn that into like a positive, like in their view?
Yeah, Parallax's involvement with the Sinestro Corps is tenuous at best. I think he just likes that there's a core of literal horror movie villains out there. Like if I told you about Crib,
the person who steals the kids.
Yeah, the Sinestro Corps member that like steals babies and puts them inside her back. It's fucking terrifying. Like that's just a horror movie. Like it's just a horror movie, but it's an alien now, and it's involved in this intergalactic war. So yeah, like Crib is a good example of that. I think what I want to touch on with what you were talking about there is the very primal nature, because in Blackest Night we get like what creates the entities, and so it goes like the first spark of life in the universe created the life entity. And that life had to will itself to move, which then created the will entity ion. And then the second that life began to spur and grow in that manner, it eventually created predation, which created the fear entity. So really, like, those are the first, in the Green Lantern lore, will and fear are literally the building blocks for life in the universe. And it's really, really cool how that all kind of comes together. Like everything else, rage, hope, like all of those are kind of the extremes of the entities, or the extremes of the emotional spectrum, because they're all very secondary. They're all very, like, you know, you need will to do anything. You need to move your pinky, you have to will yourself to do it. And you also need fear to exist, because if you weren't ever afraid of any goddamn thing in the universe, then you're just gonna die. That's just how that works. So everything else is just a secondary thing, and that's why will is the strongest of just raw power of the lights, is because it's so innate to every action. The central battery feeds upon all the excess will that is generated in the universe, because you have to use the same amount of will to move your pinky as you do to stand up, as you do to lift a block of concrete if you're trying to save someone's life that's been buried in a building, or yada yada. Like, it all requires will, and so there's like excess will put out into the universe, and the battery just collects it. And that's what the Weaponers and Quard do to create Sinestro's core and batteries. They start to collect ambient fear energy in the universe, and because those two are the most prevalent energies within sentient, or not even sentient, within all life in the galaxy, those are the two most powerful forces. And so Parallax becomes that just overwhelming, impossible to defeat force, and just, you can't beat fear unless you have the will to overcome it, the will to accept your fear and go into that burning building anyway. Like, that's the really interesting side of Hal Jordan, like, juxtaposed against Parallax there. Is Parallax is a retcon, but in doing so, he is kind of the ultimate embodiment of what makes the Hal Jordan archetype of just the brave hero work. Is, like, you know, you'll hear that all the time of Hal Jordan's not an interesting character, and, you know, he's not really on his own. He's an archetype. But what makes that archetype so interesting is that idea of the person who will do anything despite how scary it is. And so, like, creating Parallax as the villain for that is a really, really interesting dynamic, I feel.
Yeah, and their relationship together is something interesting to me, because how it read to me, because there's a scene in Brightest Day where, like, Parallax gets in the Flash, and then Hal kind of has a moment where he's just like, you're just doing this to get to me, I'm the one you want. It really came, again, Spider-Man guy, really came across to me how the symbiote sees Peter Parker as, like, I hate you, but it comes from a place of, like, I loved being with you. Does Parallax kind of have... It came across to me that he liked having Hal Jordan as, like, his host.
I mean, I think you're not wrong to read into that, but I don't think there's anything, at least in what I've read, that's, like, overly explicit. I will say that Parallax is a lot tamer around everyone else. Like, when Krona's using him in that book, he's pretty much just like a trained dog. In New 52, Sinestro got a series, and it has a really, really great opening where Sinestro has just been living on, like, a jungle planet, no civilization, for an indeterminate amount of time. And then his core members come to get him because they finally found him. And he just releases Parallax and uses it to attack someone, and then like a dog calls it back into him. So he's a lot tamer around most everyone else, except for Green Lanterns. There's an issue or two, or like kind of the beginning to middle of the Sinestro Corps War storyline. Kyle has the Ion entity at that time, and part of Sinestro's initial assault is they capture Kyle, remove Ion, and implant Parallax. And so through the first half of the Sinestro Corps War, Kyle's walking around Parallaxified. And that gets really interesting because, yeah, he goes up against Hal Jordan again, and they kind of play with I'm the younger, better version of you. You're old and replaceable. I was better at being a Green Lantern than you ever were. So, like, again, Parallax is very much playing on that fear, like those innate fears that Hal has, but that he overcomes anyway. But what's really, really interesting from Kyle's point of view is he's kind of trapped inside his own body, watching Parallax do the things he's doing in his body. And it's so fucking Star Warsy. Kyle's trapped in the house he grew up in as a kid, and his way out is to reject Parallax and enter a painting that he always looked at on his mother's wall. It's so cool.
That actually sounds quite creative.
Yeah, that shit. I love it. Like, so it's a painting that he always looked at, but he was always kind of afraid of, because there's a boy in a field who was turned around and you couldn't see his face, and so Kyle has to like confront that fear of like what did that kid's face look like. So it's that innate fear that he has to confront in order to escape Parallax's hold. Sinestro Corps War is by far the best thing that Johns wrote in the entire Green Lantern run, by the way.
There's a heavy recommendation. But yeah, I get you. It's always cool when you have archetype villains like that, which like involve possession, because it lets you play with a lot of heroes. More so, I don't know, because we both like the Darth Sidious archetype, but do you feel like Parallax as a character, in almost a parallel to Hal Jordan, is more interesting simply because of how he interacts with other characters and what he puts them through, whereas he himself hasn't got a lot to him?
I think that would be a really good summation of him. Like, he's got a shtick, which is to, just shout, like, try to demoralize people with their fears. And he's got, like, a cool ability, which is to possess and control people. And he's got a cool aesthetic. But you couldn't do a Parallax book, though.
No.
You could do a Sinestro book, because... And of course we did, and he had Parallax. And it's like, it's a cool power-up. It's a cool this, that, or the other. But yeah, you couldn't do a Venom book that's just the symbiote. You need the dynamic. You need the host. Watch, someone's gonna be like, in this book, it's all about the symbiote. The hosts never even come into it. I'm like, well, that's probably why I didn't read it. Like, that's just, you need the dynamic. He's a character created for a dynamic, and so you need the kind of force for him to play off of. I'd say I think that's a good way to look at him.
Just you saying that has actually made me want to ask you a question and how you'd feel about this, because we sometimes do these like snapshot DC, like, here's what happened in this past thing. Like, Marvel's got a book at the moment currently called Symbiote Spider-Man, which is just their excuse to get to tell stories when Peter Parker had the symbiote in the past, but like in a modern setting, because those stories were written before the symbiote lore even really got finalized. So now people are like saying, well, now we can tell stories with that about now that we know how the symbiote is. would you like to see some Parallax Hal Jordan stories now that we know what that is meant to be?
You know, it's interesting because, like, there's the redesign of Hal Jordan with, like, the gray stripes in his hair is retroactively made that Parallax had started to possess him before Coast City had blown up. And that was, like, the beginning stages of it, is, like, waking up with gray hair was a sign that, you know, the fear was beginning to set in Hal Jordan's life. So I think, you know, with that in mind, you could maybe do stories where, like, we start to see Hal Jordan go a little over edge. I'd be interested in it, but I just don't think that the market is there for it in the same way it is for Symbiote Spider-Man. Like, Green Lantern has enough trouble supporting one book at a time with, like, all the good that's been done for the franchise in the last 10 years. Or longer than 10 years, last 15 years. I don't think that there's the market for it to go back and revisit, like, an era where things weren't as good. But I'd be interested in, like, you could do a one-shot like that, maybe. And that could be interesting. That could be like a, you know, like a flashback story in an arc about Parallax again. Because Parallax hasn't really been, again, to my knowledge at least, I haven't kept up with a lot of Rebirth stuff until Grant Morrison came on. He hasn't really been the main focus as a villain ever since. He's basically just been kind of like a power-up. So that could be maybe an interesting way to do like a Parallax as the villain story again.
Because then you could actually get to... We've got the whole idea now of Parallax possessing these people and making these heroes go through trials, and we retroactively added that to Hal Jordan, but we never really got to tell that story with that new context, because the Parallax Hal Jordan stories are very different than... Like, in those stories, he does a heroic sacrifice that turns him into the Spectre eventually. But it's like it's a moment of, like, Hal Jordan. He was a villain, but he was a villain who had, like, noble goals. Like, he's a Thanos type. He's completely insane and completely impossible, but he thinks he's doing, like, a good goal, which is, like, again, pretty generic. But it's one of those things that it isn't necessarily the same way Parallax is portrayed when he possesses, like, other heroes and just makes them, like, straight up just evil. Like, for some reason, Hal Jordan was very different in that possession, and I think there's a story you could do that. Even if you just made, like, an out of continuity, like, Black Label thing, I think there's some, because Green Lantern doesn't have a lot of stuff like that, and I think that's a way you could get into it if you just, like,
you know, now that you mention it, I don't know why I didn't think of this. I know during the Convergence event, there's a Convergence Parallax storyline, where I think they're doing exactly what you're talking about there. Where they're like, okay, we're doing Convergence stuff, and Parallax, you know, and that kind of, like, jumped all over the DC Universe timeline and stuff. And so we're doing a story where Parallax, Hal Jordan, is being written like we write Parallax now. I didn't read it, but I'm pretty sure that's what the premise of that story is.
That's interesting. Again, because that's where I would take it, just from what little I've seen. It seems like something that's a little bit unexplored, and even a Convergence one-shot, those were very hit and miss with a lot of the misses, so...
Yeah, Wonder Woman versus Vampire Joker was really stupid. You think I'm kidding, I'm not. That was the thing.
That was the thing. Comics. But yeah, back to the more sensible bug aliens.
I mean, and that's one of the things I really like is all the entities, like, some of them make more sense than others, but, like, Parallax is probably the one that makes the most sense. Oh, it's a bug. Everyone's kind of scared of bugs. Ion's a fish, yeah, like, you know, the fish that grew legs kind of thing. That stuff kind of works. The butcher's a bull, that's obvious. I don't know what the fuck the Predator is.
Isn't Iron like some fucking whale?
Yeah, it's like a fish, so it's like the first fish that grew legs kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I saw that wasn't the first thing that came to my head. I was just like, damn. That fish really willed itself to move through space.
It's I mean, like, the fucking the gimmick goes away a little bit by the time you get to the compassion entity, and it's like, well, it's an octopus because it can wield all of the emotions at once. Yeah, but like, what the fuck do octopuses have in common with compassion?
They have 8 arms to hold you.
They give really good hugs.
There you go. We just fucking solved your problem, Green Lantern fake fan. You even put 2 seconds before into it.
Try to remember, what's the Hope entity? It's like a fucking bird. I mean, like, the Avarice entity was a snake. That has like all those biblical connotations.
I mean, there you go. We just confirmed the existence of Christianity in the DCU.
That shit gets so complicated so quickly. I have no idea how Batman's an atheist when literally there's like video evidence of a hand creating the universe. Like, what the fuck, Batman?
Because at that point he's just like, he's an atheist because he hasn't met a god he can't defeat yet. That's when he'll start believing in them. He can't put faith into something he's kicked their ass off. That's my reasoning for that. He's got a contingency plan for that hand. But
get
like
a giant mousetrap.
I mean, giant, and it's just like multiversal. They get the true form of like High Father to set up a new god's mousetrap. Like the cosmic DC things with Parallax can get kind of crazy, and I feel like it's interesting to pair that with, because I do want to kind of talk about this, because you defend this maybe as much as it deserves, maybe more than it deserves. I'm not the one to judge that. I'm gonna leave that entirely up to you, my friend. But Parallax was the main villain, kind of, or dual villain of the Green Lantern movie.
Mm-hmm.
How did you feel about him in that?
I mean, he's pretty generic villain in that, though. Like, he's definitely got his moments where he's got that more Parallax feel. And I mean, they got Clancy Brown to voice him, so you can't hate on it too much. But he's got that moment where he talks to Hal via Hector Hammond, and it's like, I'm going to destroy everything. I'm going to destroy your planet because I didn't get to personally watch the Green Lantern that sealed me away die, and you're the best I have to live through that vicariously. And then after that, I'm going to Oa, and I'm going to destroy that. It's like that very, like, I'm going to kill everything you love, and you're going to watch it happen. Like, that's very Parallax-esque. Other than that, he's pretty just generic, like, you know, sucking the life out of things, big cosmic bad guy. He doesn't have a lot of personality in that film outside of that, like, 1 or 2 cool speech moments.
Mm-hmm. That's where I was kind of feeling is like a trapping you can fall into a character like this is because he's so. Whenever you try to embodiment all of fear, it just invites being generic.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't give. The moment you try and give it more attributes, you run the risk of making it not being all-encompassing. So it's kind of like a self-defeating. Like, you have to ride a very fine line with, again, I think a very good example you mentioned here, I'm going to keep harping on it, is Darth Sidious. You can tell a lot of writers in, like, different Star Wars books, the ones that know how to write Sidious, keep him just the right line of absolute evil while still maintaining his own character, so he can get that balance, whereas some just go to generic absolute evil archetype. That, like, it's weird to say it's an archetype because Sidious kind of made his own archetype when he turned up, but you get what I mean. Like, Parallax can kind of run into that trapping. I could feel like in, again, I haven't read as much, but he's the kind of character where, like Galactus, because they're such giant cosmic forces, they don't get to people who not like aren't Jeff Johns and stuff and didn't want to like take the effort to look into them would just see them as that, which maybe explains why he's only been used as a power-up in recent years, because when he's just the big dumb fear entity, at that point he is just a power battery. He's not a character to is in the same way as like like the Beyonder or something in Marvel can just be seen as a power source for Doctor Doom to steal from. Like there's stuff like that where you almost turn them into a MacGuffin rather than a villain for Green Lantern's Rose Gallery, because he seems so much bigger than the rest of Hal Jordan, because he's such an embodiment concept. Like he almost feels like he should be like a Justice League villain and not a Green Lantern Corps villain.
It's funny because there's like a line in Green Lantern Rebirth where like, this is bigger than the League. This is a Green Lantern Corps issue.
I'm just gonna say Jeff Johns got on his own fucking hype train there. Excuse me. All right, you guys handle the next crisis, okay? Superman's gonna sit this one out, big boys. You got it right.
I don't know. That's like kind of the idea. Is like, so it doesn't really have much to do with anything. I'm gonna say it because when else am I gonna get the chance? So like, I like to imagine that like Abin Sur was a member of like 7 Justice Leagues, and then like Hal Jordan, like Justice Leagues across different planets in the sector. And then Hal Jordan took over the ring and he joined like the Earth Justice League and then started like going out doing his space missions, and like randomly came onto a planet and like random alien superhero came up and was like, Abin Sur, it's been so... No, he passed the ring? Is that why he hasn't been to the meetings in so long? But it's okay, you're here to take his place on our League of Justice. And Hal Jordan's like, yeah, totally. That's what I'm here for, to join this planet's Justice League. And then like Hal Jordan just didn't even realize that there's like 12 billion Justice Leagues all with the same scale of power of Earth's Justice League, and they're all dealing with the same level of threats, and he's just been incredibly selfish and just stationing on Earth, because that's very Hal Jordan right there.
That's pretty great, actually.
That's purely headcanon, nothing to do with anything, but just yeah. Again, I don't know. I think he works as a villain. I think it's a little weird to have a big cosmic entity be obsessed with like one dude, but at the same time, it's the one dude who beat him. So you can see it at least, you know.
I mean, Darkseid kind of has that thing with Superman, but like Superman is so far below his scale and completely nothing to do with the rest of the New God stuff, because Superman keeps being the one who he's the only non-New God who interrupts his plans. He's got like a thing for him. He's got like an
hate boner.
Yeah, legit. It's like one of those things where Darkseid will go out of his way to fuck with Superman specifically, even though he really shouldn't care because he's so far above Superman's power level. I think the same thing could apply to Parallax and Hal Jordan. It's a testament to how grand the DC heroes are. Like even like Batman and like Barbatos. Like that is a grand cosmic entity. Yeah, that is a grand cosmic entity that just fucking fixated on Bruce Wayne because of the comparison run.
Is this gonna be like a Bat-Mite thing where like you got Mixoplick, Bat-Mite, there's like a Green Arrow one where it's like every superhero has their own fifth dimensional imp and like their own personal cosmic entity that has a hate boner for them.
And then the natural culmination of that is we get the Legion of Cosmic Entity of Doom, which is the fucking hypest shit ever.
Yeah, so like you got Darkseid, Parallax, Barbatos. Who would Wonder Woman's be? Shit.
The entire Greek pantheon.
No. It's gotta be like the embodiment of showmanism. I love this idea. All right, next DC What If. Alrighty. Anyway, okay. I think that's about it. As far as recommended reading, obviously DC Green Lantern Rebirth is probably it's the introduction to Parallax. The Sinestro Corps War, great storytelling stuff done with Parallax there, and I liked the first issue of Sinestro well enough.
There you go. What he said.
And also, like I was trying to leave Brightest Day open for you to be able to suggest.
Oh, I will suggest Brightest Day, my favorite Green Lantern story.
The
By
only...
default.
Alrighty. Alfie, who are we going to be talking about next time?
I guess I'm gonna stick to your theme of keeping it the DC show because I like you made me laugh when you said that last week. I kind of want to keep the theme here because I've actually wanted to talk about this guy since you mentioned this guy. Have you done one on Sinestro?
I don't think so.
Do you want to do Sinestro?
Yeah, it's a little rule breaky, but sure. Fuck it. Why not? Alrighty. Sounds good. Alright, everyone. Thanks very much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
I'm a geek for fun.
And we are your geeky gentlemen. And we will be discussing things.